All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's presentation. We apologize for having to switch it to virtual only, but given the winter snowstorm, we're glad we're still able to proceed with this virtually. My name is Mark Klapach-Mathias, and I'm here representing two of the sponsors for tonight's event, including the University of Wisconsin-River Falls Sustainability Office and Hope for Creation. The additional two sponsors for the Sustainability Speaker Series include Powerful Choices and our host, the River Falls Public Library. An additional sponsor for tonight's specific presentation is the UWRF Green Team Student Organization. We are very thankful for all of these sponsors working collaboratively in our community to make tonight's event a reality. If anyone would like to get in touch with any of these organizations, feel free to email sustainability@uwrf.edu and we can send you contact information for each of them. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker tonight. Rachel is an edible landscape designer based out of Mount Horeb, Wisconsin. After studying horticulture and landscape design at the University of Minnesota, she became a gardener, landscape designer, and business owner. Wanting a change of pace, she joined the Peace Corps in West Africa for 2 years before returning home. She then continued her education, getting a permaculture design certificate and completing an herbal and botanical studies program. Finding her passion in medicinal plants and design, she currently works to help people create edible landscapes that enhance their lifestyle by increasing their health, making community, reducing food miles, and imagining the garden of their dreams. Rachel is a professional landscape designer who has specialized in edible, medicinal, and permaculture-based garden designs since 2012. I'll now hand it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here. Thank you for the introduction and for having me today. Like Mark said, my name is Rachel Belida, and I will be talking about one of my absolute favorite topics, which is edible landscape design. So for tonight, the overview of the presentation is that I'm going to talk a little bit more about my path into this meaningful work and talk about what I do for clients now. And then I'll go into the benefits of growing your own food and talk about where to start or how to expand if you're already a gardener. So my path into this meaningful work, it's been a journey and it's all been fun and exciting. I grew up in Wisconsin and my family was not into gardening. So it wasn't until high school that I discovered gardening, and it was purely by chance. I was avoiding a biology class where I had to dissect animals because I was really not interested in that. So I ended up in a horticulture-based biology class, and it turns out that I loved it. I just fell in love with plants. We got to do some annual flower garden designs, and my teacher was amazing. So he really inspired me to study plants. So it's all because of him that I decided to study horticulture. So I went off to college at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, where I got my degree in horticulture with an emphasis in landscape design. But about 3 years into my education, I started to think more about the environment. And I was thinking like, maybe I want to stay in school longer. Perhaps I want to get a master's degree or a second degree in something like environmental science or natural resource management. But in the end, I decided to just finish up my bachelor's and graduate. So that's what I did. And I started working for a company in Minneapolis. It was a small woman-owned landscape business. So I did that for a year. And then I started off on my own. So I bought this rusty old white pickup truck, which was just great. And I did landscape design, maintenance, and installation for clients in the Twin Cities metro area. But all the while, I kept questioning my path. I kept thinking, like, there's got to be more that I can do. I mean, I love gardening, but I just felt like there was more I could do. So at some point, I started thinking about growing food. And I was like, well, why can't we just swap out some of these ornamental shrubs and grow some berries or food instead? So that was kind of in the back of my mind. But at the same time, I also wanted to join the Peace Corps. And it just felt like a good time to do it. So I had my business for about 3 or 4 years, and I applied for the Peace Corps, and I ended up getting accepted, and I went to Mali, West Africa. So there's so much I could tell you about Mali, but the two things that I really want to talk about today are experiencing how people live there and really thinking about water and community. It was just really, really eye-opening to live in a village where everyone like worked together and people helped each other out. And the women, you can see there's a picture in the top right corner of the women pounding some grains in the village. And the kids really kind of looked after each other. And there was just like packs of kids in the village. And it was just really neat. So that got me thinking a lot about community and how that sort of differs from home and where I grew up, and where people are more sort of, we've got our community, but kind of in our separate houses and really individual lives. And then I also started thinking a lot about water, because when you have to carry buckets of water on your head for everything you need, from drinking to cleaning to washing, you really start to value and understand the amount of water you use on a daily basis. So I tried to figure out ways to use the water more than once. Maybe I could use some water to rinse something and then keep that water and use it to wash my clothes. So I did a lot with, trying to maximize my water use. And while I was also in Mali, I got to see some gardens, and that got me thinking about the gardens back home and the gardening work I had been doing. So in Mali, everything was really low tech, very kind of basic. You can see there are some people in the pictures there watering their gardens by hand. The one guy in the bottom right-hand corner, he's watering his garden with a dry gourd that he uses for a watering can. So that got me thinking, like, how can we make better use of water in our landscapes back home? And how can we really embrace lower tech systems in our landscapes? Because a lot of the gardening I was doing was for clients who had, expensive, elaborate, kind of high-tech irrigation systems built in. So I was trying to think of like how that could be more simplified and more environmentally friendly, I guess. So all of that was kind of in the back of my mind. And when I was there, I got to work with this really great group of people. There were 5 people that ran a fish farm that they started, that I kind of assisted them with. So in the middle, there's 2 of the women that I worked with. And then the photo right below them is the fish farm. So there's 2 ponds. And that just kind of gets back to the community aspect, where these 5 fish farm managers were working together so that they could raise food and earn some more money for their village. After Peace Corps, I moved to Portland, Oregon, and all of these ideas about water and community and gardening were still kind of rolling around in my mind, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I had a part-time job for a while, but I kept coming back to the question, how can I change the world through work I love? And maybe change the world is a big goal, but like, how can I make an impact? Like, how can I have an impact on my community and just do something good in the world? My health wasn't great. I was pretty sick after Peace Corps, so I felt like I just couldn't physically keep up with the landscaping and the gardening that I had been doing, but I really loved the design side of things. And when I was in Peace Corps, I read a book about permaculture design. So I decided to take a permaculture design course, and I studied with Toby Hemingway, and he's the author of Gaia's Garden. And he was such an amazing man, so inspiring and just brilliant. So if you don't know this book, I highly recommend checking it out. It's permaculture, kind of on the home scale permaculture. So there's awesome ideas, and it really breaks down permaculture in a way that's easy to understand. And after that, so I did that program. That was about 10 months long or so. And then I was inspired by a friend of mine who showed me all of this herbal medicine that she was making. And I was like, just fascinated. I was like, wow, I like heard of this stuff, but I don't know anything about it. And she opened her kitchen cupboard, and there were just jars and jars of medicine. I was like, wow, I have to take this class. So the next year I took this program. It was about 9 months or so long, and we studied botany and medicinal plants. We learned all about medicine making. So I did that, and then at about that time, I decided that I really wanted to get back into landscape design work. I wasn't feeling very fulfilled in the work I was doing part-time. So I kind of designed my own sort of system, or my own design style, I guess. And it's basically a combination of the ornamental landscape design that I learned in college, plus permaculture, and then I add in edible and medicinal plants with that, as well as pollinator plants and native plants. So in 2012, I started my business, which I still have now, called Daily Harvest Designs. And if you're not familiar with permaculture, I know I've been throwing that word around, but it's a really big topic. But in a very basic nutshell, it's a smart system of design that focuses on relationships between things rather than on each separate part. And it's built on 3 pillars, which are care for the earth, care for people, and return the surplus. So that leads me to where I am now at this point. I moved back to my home state of Wisconsin. So I currently live about 30 minutes west of Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm still doing design work for clients, which I love. And let's go to this slide. So I do design work and design consultations, both in person and virtually. The virtual part I added since COVID started. And the beauty of this design work is that you can really get the look and feel of an ornamental landscape that draws you outside and into the garden while also growing tons of food. And by building in the permaculture piece into the landscape design, it can help save money, resources, and time. And clients definitely love that. Oops. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. I pressed the wrong button. So the other thing I have going on is an online course that I created in 2018. And this was meant for property owners or homeowners that wanted to design their own edible landscapes. Because the people I tend to attract to my business are DIY type people. They like to get their hands dirty, but sometimes they just need a little bit of direction with the landscape design side of things. So I'm currently updating that course, and I've split it into a beginner's level and an advanced course. And I also have an interactive workbook that's more of a fun, like cut and paste format activity. And my goal is to reach as many people, as I can who want to do edible landscape design work, and offer different formats, because not everyone needs the same type of assistance. And the reason I want to do all of this is because there are so many benefits of growing food, even just a little bit of food. And edible landscaping is just so amazing. So there are health benefits, like getting physical exercise, lots of fresh air and sunlight. You can have more control over your food, so you can decide what fertilizers or chemicals you want or don't want in your food, which is really awesome. You know exactly what's gone into your food. Having a garden encourages you to eat lots of fresh fruits and veggies, and it encourages cooking from scratch. And that's been super fun for me. We have our favorites at home. So one thing that we make pretty often is either quiche or frittata. And we do that in the summer. We have chicken, so we always have plenty of eggs, and we have lots of veggies and herbs. So every quiche is different. And it's just such a great way to use that food and just have it right there. And it's super fresh and delicious. Another thing I started making this year is jam tarts. So you can see the jam tart in the top picture there in the middle. And that's basically like a little mini pie with jam in the center. And I find that, over time, my cooking style has shifted because I need to figure out ways to use all of this food that I preserve. And I'm really not a big peanut butter and jelly fan. So I'm like, well, what else am I going to do with the jam? So it's just been a really fun way to incorporate all of this into like a pretty healthy lifestyle. And then back to the physical exercise piece for a minute. Yeah, I'm not like a gym person at all, but getting outside, it's so great to be able to go outside and garden and know that I'm stretching my body and I'm using my muscles, and it's just part of my daily life. And I think my clients like that as well, and other gardeners out there will understand that. Having an edible landscape really builds community. It's a wonderful way to meet your neighbors, and you can meet people that are walking by, meet your neighbors on either side of you. And once you get to know people, you can start talking about gardening and sharing seeds, swapping produce, dropping off your extras at another neighbor's house. There's a sweet old lady next door to me, and I always take peaches over. We've got a really great peach tree, so she loves the peaches. And they'll take other food over to her. Another way to build community is through seed and plant swaps. So you might already have one in River Falls where you are, or wherever else you are watching from. But it's just so fun to be able to share those seeds and just try new foods that you might not have been aware of. And there was this one time where the neighbor kids came over. It was a couple of years after we moved into our house, and they were asking about a lemon cucumber. They had never seen one. They're like, wow, what's that? I was like, well, what do you think it is? They're like, I don't know what that is. So it was pretty cool to just like see their like interest and curiosity and kind of amazement that like, wow, cucumbers can look like that. I had no idea. So I really love that about the community. Is just a really great way to share. Another thing is that working together and sharing the harvest or equipment has been a really good way for us and for other people to get to know each other and to help each other out. So in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a picture of my husband driving this little excavator, and that's his friend up on the roof of our old shed. And I come up with a lot of ideas, and I'm not always the one that implements them, but thankfully I have other people to help with that. So they're basically taking apart the shed and lifting that roof and putting it on the chicken run right next to it, the red building. And, in exchange, we paid our friend with some fresh roasted coffee that one of our friends sells in town. So we supported our other friend, and then, we gave him a whole bunch of vegetables. And when he needs some help then with something else, then we'll be happy to help him. Another example is last summer, a friend of mine came over and we harvested black currants. And I'm still trying to figure out the best way to eat black currants, but she was totally up for it. So we harvested currants all morning. I had tons and tons of them, and our kids played together. And then I sent her, or she left with the currants and some canning jars and lids that I gave to her. And she made jam from them and brought half of it back to me. So I just love like all the levels of like community that's built into there. It's the friendship, it's the working together, it's a sharing food, sharing the harvest, and really sharing the work, which I think is beautiful. And then last thing I just want to mention about sharing and working together is figuring out ways to share specialty kitchen equipment. So on the bottom left picture, there's my steam juicer pot. There's another level that goes on top of it, but it's just a really great tool for turning fruit into juice in like no time flat. So with things like that, not everyone needs one. So trying to figure out ways to work together so that you can share these specialty tools. And, we lend that to a friend that grows tons of grapes, and he'll turn his grapes into juice with our pot and then give that back to us, plus a couple of quarts of grape juice. So it's just really lovely. Next is environment and pollinators. This is really big. A lot of the design work I do really takes water into consideration. So I do my best to slow down the stormwater, all the rainwater, and soak it into the landscape rather than letting it run off. Because if we can get that water to stay on the landscape, it's going to start to recharge the groundwater, and it's also not letting any pollutants run off the property with it. So you're keeping possible pollutants out of your local waterways. And then once you keep that water on your site, the plants act like filters and they help clean that water before, it kind of moves on to the next phase of its water cycle. When you have your own garden, you get to reduce or eliminate chemical use, which is great. So you can choose organic methods. And if you have a diverse garden, that really helps to decrease the pests and diseases in the garden. Another thing is to work that I do in my designs is to help clients work on closing the nutrient cycle. So composting is a good example of that. If you can compost on site, you can keep all of that energy, like all of those materials that come from your garden, you can keep that on site and turn it right into compost and put it back on your soil. So rather than bringing in fertilizers that might run off or, that you have to pay for, it's just another input. It's really amazing to try to create these more closed loop cycles. And that's a lot of where the permaculture design part of my work comes in. Excuse me. And then lastly, for the environment and pollinators benefit is that growing a garden reduces the amount of lawn. So based on an article from 2011, which is a little bit old, but I looked it up and it still seems to be about, roughly the same number. There's 40 million acres of turf grass in the US, and that's huge. So I'm sure you all know, the turf grass, it takes a lot of water. It takes, mowing, and a lot of people put fertilizer and chemicals on that lawn, but it's not giving us anything. I mean, it's not giving us a really big output. So there's a lot of input and not a lot of output with the lawn. Sure, it's a great place to hang out and play ball and have a picnic, but if we can reduce some of that lawn and instead plant gardens, whether they're native gardens or edible gardens, that's really creating a place for pollinators and just more diversity in the garden and a way to, slow down the water. So edible landscaping has been really excellent for that. The last thing I want to talk about for the benefits is that local foods and eating seasonally are really awesome. So gardening and farmers markets help you learn what's in season. And this is really big. It took me a while to shift my diet and really start to embrace seasonal eating. And yeah, there's definitely more work I could do, but it's really cool once you start to see and understand the different foods and what's in season when, and how to incorporate that into your diet and really make the most of it by eating just tons of whatever's in season, and then maybe saving extra for later if you have extras. And if you're gardening, you can select food for flavor and nutrition, not transportability, which is pretty great. So you can have foods that taste delicious, that are picked perfectly ripe, and they're super fresh. And then lastly, diversity in your diet. Kind of like diversity in a garden. I feel like if there's more diversity in your diet, perhaps it's just you're creating a better internal ecosystem that's more resilient and stronger, which is, I feel, is different than, shopping at the grocery store and buying your favorite foods, no matter the season, kind of throughout the year. It's great to have that extra diversity. So these photos on the slide here, the top left one is stinging nettles. That's one of our favorite spring foods. They come up early and you can eat them when they're cooked. Don't eat them raw, but you can use them like spinach. You can dry them and and make tea out of them. And they're just a really beautiful medicinal and food plant. It's like a food medicine that's really lovely. It's a good spring tonic. And then the next picture to the right of that in the corner, it's just an example of, a harvest in the summer. There's some sweet corn, there's some greens. In the summer, there's just such a huge variety of food that's ready in the garden. In the fall, we love our apples, tons and tons of apples last year, which is great. So that's a time for making apple sauces and apple pies. And then we also froze some this winter because we had such a huge apple harvest. And I've used those to make apple pies and to make little like mini apple pie kind of jam tarts with those. And then lastly is winter. So winter, there's an example of our shelf in the basement packed full of squash and potatoes. There's garlic, a few onions, not quite enough onions. But that amount of squash was enough to keep our family of 4 fed, full of squash like pumpkin bread, pumpkin granola, pumpkin pies, all sorts of great things. So that makes a big part of our winter diet. So if you're new to gardening, all of this could sound pretty overwhelming. And if you're not new to gardening, you might be wondering, well, I'm already doing a lot of this. What more could I do? So hopefully I can answer those questions in this part. So my biggest tip is when you're just getting started, start small and have a plan. So here's an example of my yard. The picture on the far left is 2018. We bought our house in January of 2018. So this is sometime late winter, before the grass started greening up. And you can see there's not too much going on there. There's a couple of shrubs off to the left. And there was a patch where there had been a vegetable garden that's not in that picture, but that was about it. So I created a plan, and slowly I've been working toward implementing that over the last 5 years. The middle photo is, I believe, 2020. You can see it's starting to kind of come together. It's still pretty patchy and it doesn't look super awesome, but there is a vegetable garden. We've got our chickens and some berry bushes on the left side. And then the picture on the right is last year or the year before. I can't quite remember, but you can see that, the design is really starting to take shape, and you can see that there's actually like a plan and a purpose with the landscape design. So starting small is really a good idea. And having a plan is an excellent idea. I find that a lot of people call me after they've, had some failed projects. They have plants that are just not in the best places, and they just need some help figuring out how to make their landscape work better. Like, how can they make it more functional? How can they make it flow better? And that's exactly what a design does. So my goal is to help people create designs that are super functional, customized for their unique space and for their unique interests and tastes. Designs that are low maintenance. And yes, edible gardens do require some maintenance, but being able to plant a lot of perennials, which I'll talk about soon, helps make your edible landscape more low maintenance. And then, of course, environmentally friendly, like I mentioned, with the water management on site. That's really great. Cost effective and visually pleasing are also benefits you can get from having a plan when you just start out, rather than just planting things sort of willy-nilly. So if you're brand new to gardening and you're just getting started, I recommend starting small, like literally just a couple pots, some herbs, some veggies. You can do it on your patio or balcony if you have one. You could plant a raised bed or two. You could get a community garden plot or share a plot with someone. Maybe you have, a neighbor who gardens that could let you use a little bit of space in their yard. But starting small is really helpful because that allows you to learn how much you can maintain and how much you can eat. Because when you're first starting out, it's hard to know how many plants, how many of each type of plant you might want, because you don't really know how much you're going to need. You're maybe not sure what the yield will be. And yes, you can definitely look up those numbers. You look up those numbers online, but it's always different when you do it on your own. And if you have a small space and make a mistake, it's much easier to manage and fix than if you have a big space and a big mistake. So it's all about avoiding overwhelm, and setting yourself up for success so you can gain some confidence and then expand when you're ready. And the best place to start, I always recommend that my clients start right outside their door. And the reason is that if your garden is right outside your door, you're not going to forget about it. You'll notice if your plants need water. You'll notice if there are any pests or diseases. And you'll also see when your food is ripe and ready to harvest. And the last thing you want to do is grow this beautiful garden but forget to harvest, which I'm sure happens. But putting your garden in a place that you pass by regularly, just in your daily walking route, or anywhere else that's really convenient, is the best place to start. So if you're already gardening and you're like, well, that's great, I'm growing some veggies and herbs, but what else can I do? So kind of the next level would be to grow some perennials. And there are so many amazing perennials. Some perennial veggies that I love are rhubarb, asparagus, Egyptian walking onions, fiddlehead ferns. There are so many. And then there are also reseeding annuals that I just kind of let go nuts in my yard, because I figure I would rather have weeds that I know and love than weeds that I don't want or can't use. So some things that I just let go to seed are calendula. That's a really great medicinal plant, and it's beautiful, and you can eat the flower petals, which we often put in cookies or pancakes. And amaranth, I let amaranth just kind of go to seed. I have a really beautiful red variety. I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, but it's gorgeous. It's like 5 feet tall, and you can harvest the leaves, and you can also harvest the grains. So I just let it seed around, and then I always have a patch of amaranth. I don't have to think about it. So for me, I'm always trying to figure out ways that I can do less work, but still have a good harvest. A couple other examples are kale and collard greens. I know the climate here is probably just slightly warmer than in River Falls, so perhaps this might not work for you, but with a little protection, it might. I just leave the roots and, my kale and collard plants in the ground, and oftentimes in the spring, they'll just regrow. So I have fresh greens first thing in the spring coming from these plants that I had last year. So over time, you start to figure out all sorts of ways that you can kind of take these shortcuts that make your gardening easier and your harvests more productive. Another category of kind of the perennials is fruits, berries, and nuts. And these are, the woody plants for the most part, but they're great. And this kind of gets back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation when I was thinking about how can I shift the landscaping that I was doing to include more food plants and do something that was giving back to people more than the ornamental landscaping. So fruit trees, they come in a variety of sizes. There's dwarf, semi-dwarf, and standard. So the dwarf trees are great. They're often only like 8 to 10 feet tall and wide, and they can be planted in a lot of small spaces. So small gardens, patio gardens, things like that. And then shrubs and cane fruits, those are really good alternatives to ornamental landscape shrubs. And then nut producing shade trees, and that's a long-term commitment over many years. But if you happen to have nut trees in your yard, or there's some in the neighborhood, or even out, in the forest that you can harvest from, that's a great source of food as well. And the last category for the perennials is weeds. And honestly, I think this is my absolute favorite because weeds are so generous and they're just like giving. They just give and give and give, and they don't really need anything in return. And so many of them are just beautiful. So I've really started to embrace weeds in the garden. Some of my favorites are violets. So we have tons and tons of violets in our yard. They've kind of become a ground cover in a few spots, and I'm totally fine with that because, like I said, I'd rather have weeds that I know and love than weeds that I don't want. And I can always pull out extras. But the violet leaves are edible, and the flowers are edible, and you can also make tea out of them. So you can use them, like cook them up like spinach, or just make a salad with them, or mix them with other salad greens. And then I think my all-time favorite weed is lamb's quarter. And it tastes like, it's kind of like a nutty, spinachy flavor. And it has these beautiful silvery green leaves. So it just grows big. Like I usually pull it out of my vegetable garden, but I'll let it grow outside of the garden, amongst other plants. And it's just so big and productive. And I harvest like pounds of this stuff. And all I have to do is go out and harvest it. Like I don't plant it, I don't water it, I don't take care of it. And it just keeps coming back. So I think really learning to eat what's already in our yards and really embracing those weedy plants that, we've been told we should pull or get rid of. I think it's a really different way of looking at the landscape and shifting our diets just a little bit so that we can get these really nutritious foods and not have to do so much work. You can avoid some of that seed starting and watering and planting. And just quickly, a couple of my other favorite weeds are dandelions, chickweeds, and stinging nettle. So if you're already doing the herbs and veggies and you have some berries and, edible weeds going in your garden and you're looking to do even more, then you can kind of graduate up to more diverse mixed plantings like food forests or fruit tree guilds. So here's a picture of a fruit tree guild at my house. And a fruit tree guild is basically just a community of plants that works to support itself. And it's a way of gardening that mimics nature. It grows more efficiently, and it just has its own little community with built-in mulch, compost, fertilizer, pollinator plants, and ground covers. And this one, I have some kale growing in there. But aside from that, everything else is either a self-seeding annual or a perennial. There are some liatris flowers, calendula, oregano, catnip, skullcap, that's a medicinal plant, some comfrey, which is one of my favorites for the for the permaculture type garden. It has these giant leaves. It's a really strong, like medicinal plant that you can use for healing sprains and cuts and all sorts of amazing things. And the big leaves of it are perfect for mulch. It has these deep tap roots that pull up the nutrients. Then you can cut down the plant and use those leaves for mulch right in your garden. So creating these systems like like this fruit tree guild, or even a food forest, which is essentially something like this fruit tree guild, but on an even bigger scale, where there's just food and medicine growing everywhere you look, is pretty awesome. It really changes the way you think about gardening. So you're going from the first example, or the first step one that I talked about was annual plants basically. And then this, with these diverse plantings in the food forest, this is like a whole different level where you've got all of these perennial foods where you don't really have to do much. Like if I didn't touch this garden at all with this apple tree, I would still have fruit, I would have herbs and medicine all growing right there without doing much at all. And once they're established, they really don't need much care. So I mentioned the food forests, and they're basically, systems that are layered. So you've got your top layer, which is a canopy, and that's your large fruit and nut trees. Under that is a subcanopy, that's small fruit trees and hazelnuts and like elderberries, things about that size. Below that are shrubs, and then there's herbaceous plants like the perennial veggies, self-seeding vegetables, herbs, medicine, pollinator plants. And then there are ground covers, and there's so many awesome ground cover berries, like strawberries, obviously, everyone knows about those, creeping raspberries, lingonberries, and some low-growing aronia berries. Also, in a food forest, you can grow root crops and climbers. And an example of climbers would be peas and beans. I've found that it's easy enough to grow those right up the tree. I have a vegetable garden just on the opposite side of that apple tree, and I've had peas and beans grow right up into the apple tree, and they were happy. The apple tree was happy. So you can use your trees as trellises for some of those smaller vines. But if you're planning to grow like squash or other big vines, you might want to use a trellis instead so your tree doesn't get kind of overrun and damaged or shaded out. So I wonder if this will work. This is supposed to be a video and I forgot to test this out. So what does an edible landscape look like in action? And I don't know. Oh, it's not going to work. So basically, yeah, that's okay. So basically, it's a video of like a fast forward video of me going through the garden. So I, leave my back door, go over to the chicken run that's over here, grab the mealworms, and I drop off the compost. And then I go to the way back part of my yard where the chickens are just for the day, like in their daytime chicken tractor. I bring the chickens back, put them in their chicken run, grab the eggs, if there are any in there, and then go harvest veggies from my veggie garden. So that's the goal with the edible landscape designs that I do. It's like creating a system that flows really well and that functions really well. So what I think about for my clients is like, okay, what's your main path? Like, what are your main paths through the space? Where do you go most often? And then I try to build that in so that they can, go out and harvest their food and dump their compost and do whatever outdoor chores they need to do, and then come back and harvest their food on the way back to their house. So it's really a way of kind of connecting everything so that it flows well, and then also arranging different parts of the landscape so that, it just makes sense, like the compost next to the chicken run, and thinking about the water flow through the site. So sorry that video didn't work, but hopefully that description was good enough so you can kind of get your own mental picture. So wrapping up, I talked about my path into this meaningful work and how I kind of fell into it and, shifted how I looked at landscapes and came into permaculture, started my business. We talked about the benefits of growing food, which are many, and some of those tie right back into my time in Mali with the community and the water, and really trying to bring that back and add that into our lives here. And then I talked about where to start. So whether you're brand new to gardening or if you're already growing some vegetables, but you want to add on, hopefully you have some ideas of what else is possible and where to go next. So that is all I have for today. I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you so much for having me here. And it's really fun to talk about this topic with everyone.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was amazing. While Kim is doing the magic behind the scenes and pulling in some questions from the comments on Facebook and YouTube, I'll just ask an initial question. With your design consultations and courses, what is the demand that you're seeing for that from other clients and things? I think we have a lot of students that are watching tonight from the university, and I imagine some of them are in introductory to botany classes and things, and trying to figure out where they want to go. And I'm wondering, kind of from a career standpoint, how in demand this is.
I think it's becoming more and more in demand. Last January, so January of 2022. I was invited to present at the Foodscaper Summit. It was the very first Foodscaper Summit, And basically, it's a lot of people like me who are doing sort of their own version of edible landscaping or foodscaping, but there's no really central organization. So we're all just trying to figure it out on our own. So this really great, well, it's a company and it's sort of their sister company called the Foodscaping Headquarters or Foodscapers Headquarters. Sorry, I should know this, but anyways, they put on this summit and it was great. So it's all, foodscapers, edible landscapers that come together and just share our knowledge. So I think that it's really getting bigger. And people are just becoming more and more aware of it. So I think that it's only going to grow from now. And yeah, as far as the course goes, I think a lot of people sign up for my course after the Foodscaper Summit in 2022. And I try to, with my course update, I've tried to, share information more from the designer standpoint and not just for homeowners. So it's for people who are also looking to get into the foodscaping profession.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question in here. Have you ever had any problems storing squash in the winter? And if so, how did you overcome it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now I just keep them on a shelf in my basement, and that actually works really well. I've lost some for sure because I forget to check on them. I'm human and, things happen. So I've had some rot, which is unfortunate. But when I do, remember to check them or I go down to like pull a squash off the shelf, I'll look around. And if I see that any are starting to just get a little squishy or they need to be used, then I'll just pop those in the oven. I usually just roast the squash. So I'll pop those in the oven, cook them up and puree them, and then I freeze it. So I freeze the squash in two cup portions because I found that works really well for the pumpkin granola I mentioned and the pumpkin bread. And if I just need a half cup or a half portion of that, so 1 cup, then I'll just break that, frozen piece of pumpkin in half and use that instead. So that's been a really good workaround, but you do need the freezer space for that.
I think a lot of people will be hungry after this presentation. Do you have any suggestions for raised bed gardening?
Oh, could you be more specific?
So I would say just maybe any tips or tricks for people that, don't have the space or they're just trying to do some planting in raised beds. Anything that you've experienced, again, maybe that goes really well together or that is more successful in raised gardens versus things that, might not thrive as well in a raised garden bed situation?
Let me see. I do almost pretty much all of my gardening in the ground because I find that that's more economical. But to start with, if you have a raised garden bed and you're looking to fill it, I know I've seen like tons of posts on Instagram, people creating reels with how you fill your raised bed on a budget. So basically, you can layer in all this different organic matter. So you're not buying bags and bags of soil or, getting a huge delivery that costs a lot of money. So you're basically sheet mulching to fill it up. So that would be my first tip, is to use, different layers. And then as far as planting them goes, I don't know if I have any specific tips. I mean, I would follow probably the companion planting idea. And I wonder if I have it right here. Yeah, this book. So this book is great. Carrots Love Tomatoes. I'm sure there are other companion planting guides out there, but this is great. So you can be like, okay, well, I'm going to plant tomatoes. What should I put with it? And I know just off the top of my head, like basil and carrots are really good with tomatoes. So you can find lots of information in a book like this for what to plant together.
I actually just saw yesterday, it was like an infographic picture of like what likes to be with what. And it was like, this hates this and this likes this. And so it's fascinating.
Yes, there's definitely lots of information about that out there.
Great. What experience do you have with hazelnut trees? And then what about harvesting and using acorns? So 2 questions there.
Okay, hazelnut trees. I have 2 growing at my house. They are not producing yet. They're not big enough. but they're beautiful. I can tell you that much. They have like just this gorgeous, like orangish yellow color in the fall. So I don't have any experience with eating those or harvesting and eating those yet. And then as far as acorns go, I know that's a process, which I haven't done. I have done the black walnut thing, which is really amazing. But the acorns, I know you have to like, I don't know, boil them and grind them. And yeah, it's a big process. So yeah, so I don't have more information on that specifically.
It's all right. Any suggestions for convincing people that weeds can be delicious and nutritious?
Cook for them. Let's see. Yeah, I think just leading by example is the best way to just kind of teach people. I mean, you could knock on doors and say, "Hey, those dandelions are really great. You could eat them." But, if other people see you doing it and if you're kind of sharing your story, I think that's a really good way. There's a really awesome book about dandelions, and I think it's downstairs. I don't have it right here. It's called, I just had it. Oh, I'm not sure. I'm sorry, but there's this whole book about dandelions and recipes, and it's really amazing. So that's something to check out. I'll let you know if I think of the name of it.
Sounds good. How long did it take you to figure out how much to grow to meet your family's need?
Oh, I'm still figuring that out. It's definitely just trial and error. And gardening, every year is different with gardening. So, like last year, I just totally failed on my tomatoes. I just, I planted them late, and this stuff happens. So, I think if you just have a really diverse garden and you just have a lot of different foods coming in, then there's not that much pressure. It's like, okay, well, I know I've got my peaches and my apples and all this stuff, and I've got tons of greens. And if my tomato harvest isn't great, then, I have other foods to fill in with it. But specifically, it's just trial and error. Like that squash picture I showed from last year, I kind of went crazy with the squash, but it was good. I mean, I still found a bag of 2021 squash in the freezer the other day because it just gets mixed in there, but it's fine. It's like, it's there. It's good. It's still usable.
Do you have any suggestions for companion plants for blueberries or apples?
Oh, very good questions. Let me see. The blueberries, they like acidic soil. You could try, hold on, wait for it. My plant knowledge. There are some other berries that like acidic soil. I'm trying to think what they are. Cranberries. Cranberries like acidic soil. You could try that with the blueberries. As far as like, a good ground cover plant. But I think, if you're planting blueberries and you can integrate them into your landscape, and, you could have like a group of blueberries and a fruit tree of some sort and some other medicinal plants, and you just start to create these plant communities. It just makes like a really diverse and wonderful group of plants that support each other. So I think that's more often my approach than trying to think specifically, well, like this and this need to go together. I just figure if I've got a lot of diversity and I plan it out, then, it all ends up working in the end. It's kind of like nature, it's kind of random, kind of not, but it all takes care of itself in the end.
There's a few different questions about rabbits or other critters or animals snacking on your edible landscaping. And do you have any strategies or anything that you've found to be successful in dealing with some of those critters?
Fencing for sure. Fencing for rabbits. I fence in my main vegetable garden areas, and then I have, vegetables that like the squash and stuff that sort of sprawl all over, and they're typically fine. So I think that over time you figure out what the rabbits and other animals like, and then those are the ones that you'll need to protect more than others. So fencing's been great. And then the other thing is that, sometimes we'll use like organic animal deterrents that'll have like, some kind of animal urine or garlic or, things like that in it. And we'll just like sprinkle it around the outside of our yard, like around the perimeter. We have some woods behind our house, so we do get deer coming in and some other wildlife. We've had skunks and possums and foxes. We had a family of foxes once. So yeah, lots of animals.
What kind of planting can help with land that ends up being kind of clay? So it sounds like it's next to a pond and they've got some clay in the ground and things. Any suggestions?
Yeah, if you want to break up that clay, you could try planting things like daikon radishes. They're just big. They're like, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but they get to be like really big and they're fat. So you could grow things like that. And instead of pulling them out, just grow it as a cover crop, chop down the top of it. So then you use all that leafy material as a mulch, and then you can do that again. So, over a few years, it'll take a little bit, but eventually over time, if you keep breaking up that clay soil with root plants like those and adding organic matter, your clay soil will start to soften up and have more life to it.
Great. I have a few just observations of things that you mentioned that I want to highlight of things that we're doing in the community as well. So in addition to the Sustainability Speaker Series, the library is also doing a winter wellness series right now. And just the way you talked about the health benefits and the connection to the physical activity and getting out in nature, I just really appreciate that connection. So for anybody watching, there's also recordings out there from some of the wellness presentations that have been done. So I would encourage you to check those out. Our next presentation in the Sustainability Speakers Series is Diana Alfuth on March 11th at 6:30 p.m. And that topic is on seed starting. So again, we're building on this and helping people learn what they need to do for seed starting. Pending any major snowstorms or anything, that one will be in person as well as virtual. So again, that's seed starting with Diana Alfuth on March 11th at 6:30 p.m. In addition to the seed starting presentation, then at EarthFest, which is on April 22nd at Glen Park from 12 to 4, numerous organizations have signed up to participate and have said that they will be giving away various types of seeds. So if you're interested in checking out some of our local community organizations, there are a variety of groups that will be there that will be giving away seeds. Also, I apologize, the Diana Alfuth presentation is March 15th. Not March 11th. So March 15th is Diana Alfuth. And then the last thing that I wanted to share is we do have a community garden here in River Falls called Grow to Share. And they just announced over the last couple of days that they are starting to accept people to be able to rent plots for this coming growing season. So if you go to the Grow to Share website, you can register for a garden plot. It's $25 for a plot. There's water on site, so it's nice and easy. They've got people there that can help give you some guidance, and people are always very helpful when you have questions. So I would encourage you to check out Grow to Share if you are not familiar with that, or as Rachel mentioned, if you're limited on space or maybe don't have room for a garden at home, Grow to Share is a good option for everyone as well. So with that, Rachel, do you have any other closing thoughts or anything you would like to share?
Not really. I'm just so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited about edible landscaping, as you might have been able to tell. And I encourage any students out there or anyone considering the field to definitely just go for it if that feels right for you, obviously, because I think that the world does need more edible landscapers and edible gardeners. It's just such a great way to help the environment and build community.
Well, thank you so much. I'm not sure what you were able to see in some of the comments, but many people have commented thanking you for tonight's presentation, saying they really appreciate all the knowledge and expertise, and they just really appreciate you sharing all of that with us. So with that, that is it for tonight. So thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you.